Greetings, everyone. It's me again, and I'd like to begin this particular entry by wishing all of my American viewers in particular a happy post Thanksgiving blur. Actually, it's fitting that that's the way I start this post because the fact that today is Black Friday is the perfect catalyst for the topic of this post. You see, I'm sure many of you have heard a lot of rumors spreading, particularly since the internet era began, roughly 20 years ago. A lot of rumors about things in society that don't always stand up to scrutiny once they're subjected to scrutiny. The most recent one I've encountered is a meme that's been making the rounds on social media, and I'm sure has been making the rounds on the internet generally for a number of years now. I'm sure it circulates every year around Thanksgiving time. I just, for some reason, didn't happen to stumble on it until a couple of days ago. Now, this particular meme, and why don't I just read you a quote directly from the copy that I saw, the version that I saw. It says, "Did you know that Black Friday stemmed from slavery? It was the day after Thanksgiving when slave traders would sell slaves for a discount to assist plantation owners with more helpers for the upcoming winter, for cutting and stacking firewood, winterproofing, etc. Hence the name." Now, an acquaintance of mine posted this on his Facebook profile just the other day, and immediately I reacted with a great deal of skepticism. I reacted skeptically because this is far from the first claim of this nature that I've encountered on the internet in all the years since I first logged on to a website. Again, well, in my case, it was 18 or 19 years ago when I was in elementary school. I've heard a lot of claims like this one before, and they tend to be debunked. So guess where I went first? I immediately went to the trusty website Snopes.com. For those of you who haven't heard of it or visited it yet, that's SNOPES.com. This is a website that is devoted to basically analyzing a lot of these claims and rumors that circulate, especially on the internet, and researching them to see whether they're true or false. Interestingly enough, a number of these stories do turn out to be true, or at least partly true. In some cases, they're exaggerated, misinterpreted, distorted, or what have you. But in a lot of other cases, they turn out to be complete and utter fabrications. It turned out that this latest story about the supposed origins of Black Friday in slavery is one of those fabrications. As the website, in fact, I'm not going to read all of the details of the origins of the term Black Friday from the website, but I can assure you that if you go check it out yourselves, you'll be able to see all the information yourselves. You'll see a debunking of the claim that the term Black Friday originated in the slavery era. It actually seems to have started out as originally a derisive, derogatory term to refer to the day after Thanksgiving because of the just hubbub and the chaos, the bedlam of shopping that always occurred on that day, which would mark the beginning of the Christmas shopping season. Because of the chaos it often engendered, and especially in cities, the term Black Friday was applied to it derisively. Only later on did it become a mainstream term that people used to refer to the day without trying to put it down. So this is just the latest in a long line of claims that turn out to be false. I remember when I was in college, some fellow students of mine, one of them, we were having a discussion that pertained to racism in American society, and one of my schoolmates mentioned that she had heard the term picnic supposedly originated in the practice of lynching, the lynchings of African Americans in the Jim Crow South. The idea was that the term picnic is derived from pick a nigger. The idea being that lynch mobs would choose a black person to lynch, and then they would have a picnic around the charred, frequently charred, frequently castrated, murdered corpse of the black lynching victim, while people would have a picnic around. And supposedly the term pick a nigger was distorted and came to be pronounced picnic, and then that term came to be applied to the actual act of, spreading towels on grass and having an outdoor communal meal. I remember looking that one up on Snopes.com years ago, and it turned out that one was a complete fabrication or misconception as well. The term picnic comes from the French word pique-nique, which is the word the French used to refer to the exact same practice of holding picnics. It doesn't have anything to do with lynching or race at all, one way or the other. So the reason I bring this up is not to make people look stupid or gullible, although I have to acknowledge they may appear that way, at least in the eyes of anyone who's in the know. The idea is that it's important for people in general to take these kinds of stories with a grain of salt. I don't know in fact, I'm pretty sure Marvin Gaye didn't come up with this saying himself, but you've probably heard the lyric from the song, I heard it through the grapevine. People say, believe none of what you see and believe none of what you hear and half of what you see. And stories like these are a great example of why people should really take that advice to heart. Now, I don't know who out there devotes time to making up these stories. I mean, some of these memes, maybe they just result from misunderstandings, but some of them are so elaborate that it's hard to believe that, people, that these things result from a game of broken telephone, wherein a message gets distorted innocently as it gets relayed from person to person. In at least some of these cases, some smartasses out there must actually be sitting down and, using the way too much time they have on their hands to come up with these memes and put them out there and just watch as people eat them up. This is not that big a deal in the grand scheme of things. It's not as if anyone really gets hurt when folks believe in memes like this one. However, there are other misconceptions out there that do spread in society that do hurt people. For example, a lot of folks have bought into the whole idea that vaccines cause autism. That's largely based on a by now totally discredited and debunked faux study from, I think, 1998 that claimed to find that, there's supposedly a strong correlation between universal vaccination of children in public schools and the spread of autism in society. Now, like I said, the scientific community has totally discredited that claim. In fact, don't quote me on this, but I think it's possible that even some of the people behind that original study have since recanted it. But unfortunately, we see a lot of folks out there today who still believe that vaccines cause autism or that they might cause some other diseases. And so you have more and more people, more and more parents here in the States especially, choosing not to have their kids vaccinated. Almost certainly, partly as a result of that, you're seeing diseases like measles and other contagious diseases making comebacks in parts of the country and actually making people sick and possibly in some cases even leading to death. So actually, in some cases, when people believe and buy into these misconceptions, they actually can do damage. So in a case like this, we're talking about something pretty harmless. This belief that the term Black Friday comes from slavery days. But, when you talk about other people believing in rumors that they hear in other contexts, that credulity can actually have some pretty harmful and damaging effects in society at large. So, I think the lesson of these stories is that people really need to develop the right intellectual habits and exercise a healthy skepticism when they hear these stories. Don't believe, in fact, let me add this caveat. Most people don't believe whatever they hear. What they'll do is they'll believe stories they hear that ring true to them based on their experiences and based on the things that they were taught growing up, the things that they heard, the narratives on which they were raised. So, for example, a lot of folks in the black community will believe stories like this Black Friday business or the picnic rumor that I mentioned earlier because it rings true to many of us because it fits into the narrative of whites as oppressors and blacks as victims, which obviously has been very true for most of the past several hundred years. And so it rings true to us, and many of us just accept it whole cloth. There's a whole list of other rumors that have spread and circulated in the black community just within the past generation or so, all of which were false, but many of which a lot of folks in the community bought into because it sounded true. The idea that the Ku Klux Klan was a part owner of Snapple. I remember back in the 90s when I was growing up, there was a rumor that circulated starting around 1997 or so. I'm sure at least a few of you have heard this before. The rumor in the 90s that the fashion designer Tommy Hilfiger had supposedly gone on the Oprah Winfrey Show, of all places, and claimed that he didn't want blacks and Latinos wearing his clothing. Or actually, there were different versions of the story, which is about what you would expect when you have a totally false fabrication that circulates like this. The broken telephone phenomenon kicks in, and the message always gets distorted as it's relayed from person to person. There were different versions of the story. The version I heard was that Tommy Hilfiger supposedly said that, if he had known so many blacks and Latinos would end up wearing his clothing, he wouldn't have used such expensive material. Now, I was maybe 11 or 12 years old when that rumor first started circulating. Even I knew better than to buy into it. I didn't give it all that much thought, frankly, at the time. But sure enough, years later, I heard that, the theory had been totally debunked. Tommy Hilfiger at that time had never appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show. He never did appear on the Oprah Winfrey Show until 2007, a decade after the rumor first started circulating, to debunk and finally put the rumor to rest. And Oprah herself said, like she had said from the beginning, she said in 2007, he's never been on my show until now, etc., etc., etc. I didn't even find out until a few years ago, about 5 years ago, that a virtually identical rumor had circulated about the late fashion designer Liz Claiborne a few years earlier, I think around 1995. Virtually the exact same rumor circulated about Liz Claiborne, where she had supposedly appeared on Oprah, of all places, and declared her contempt for a massive chunk of her client base, her consumer base. Now, that kind of rumor never made much sense. Another one that didn't make any sense at all in the late 90s was a one in which a black public figure, a black celebrity was the target. In that case, and I'm sure a lot of you remember this rumor too, in that case, there was a rumor that Lauryn Hill, the R&B and hip hop artist, had supposedly said that the version that I heard at the time was that she had said, "I would rather see babies being drowned than see a white person buying one of my records." Have you ever heard such foolishness? Why would people like Liz Claiborne, Tommy Hilfiger, or Lauryn Hill go out of their way to insult and racially slur people in their own customer bases? What do you think? They don't like money? They don't like making piles and boatloads and truckloads of money? They're going to go out of their way to diss their customer base for no reason at all? But you wouldn't believe how many people I knew who bought into these rumors. And I named the Lauryn Hill rumor particularly because I don't want anyone watching this to think I'm just dumping on black folks here. There were plenty of white people I knew who heard the rumor about Lauryn Hill, in which a black celebrity was the target. That didn't make any more sense than black folks believing the rumors about Tommy Hilfiger or Liz Claiborne. So, and I mean, there are other examples. There's the whole Willie Lynch narrative in the black community where a Caribbean, a slave owner, a British slave owner from the West Indies, who never specified which particular island he was from, supposedly traveled to Virginia in the year 1712 or so and gave a speech to Virginian slave owners telling them how to keep their slaves in line, how to divide and conquer their slaves by pitting male slaves against female slaves, darker-skinned slaves against lighter-skinned slaves, field hands, as they were called, against house slaves, and so on. That's another story that circulated widely that a lot of folks in the black community bought into. But from the research I've done on it, it's a complete fake. A number of black intellectuals have scrutinized it and found that it's a complete fabrication. It's full of anachronisms, words that didn't exist in the English language in the year 1712, historical falsehoods. This Willie Lynch person makes reference to a King James, who I think either wasn't even on the throne yet or was already dead in the year 1712. Things are the telltale signs that this thing was completely false. And of course, one of the most suspicious things about it was the fact that it just appeared on the internet around 1993, from what I've read, with no attribution whatsoever, no source. But this is something that circulated back in those days, in the 90s, through chain emails. Nowadays, that kind of thing would circulate in meme form on social media primarily, right? Who sends chain emails anymore, really? But that's the way these stories circulate. People believe them if they fit with their preconceived notions about how the world works. And I think it's a good idea to let people know that just because something rings true to you doesn't mean that it's actually true. Now, some people are very hard-headed about this sort of thing. I remember watching I haven't been able to find it on YouTube recently, but about 5 years ago, um, I dug up a video on YouTube of an old episode of I think it was the show was called "Give Me a Break" with John Stossel, and he was interviewing a focus group of African Americans who, to one degree or another, bought into a lot of these rumors and stories, including the Liz Claiborne rumor. And I remember one lady, very well spoken, articulate, intelligent, educated, said that she had actually gone to the trouble of contacting the Oprah Winfrey Show's producers to find out whether Liz Claiborne had actually said this, and they sent her a truckload of, or a crate load of documentation to prove to her that Liz Claiborne had never even appeared on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and of course this is something Oprah herself had stated publicly at the time. And yet the lady said she still believed the story. So John Stossel, an astounded John Stossel, asked her, how can you believe it if you actually researched the issue and were confronted with all this evidence to the contrary and no evidence to support it? And she said, there's an element of truth in fiction. If it weren't true at all, why would so many people believe it? Now, that's a ridiculous sentiment. Just because a lot of people believe something, it must be true. There was a time when most people in this society believed blacks were inferior to whites. Many people in this society still believe that. Does that make it true just because lots of people believe it? Obviously not. But in certain areas, people, otherwise, very intelligent, discerning, educated people, were willing to take leave of their senses, seemingly, and throw skepticism to the winds, to buy into these ideas and actually cling to believing in those ideas even after they'd been confronted with all this evidence to the contrary and the absence of evidence to support them. So people often believe what they want to believe, and the things they want to believe tend to be things that confirm their view of the world. But that doesn't make them true. And in the case of hoaxes like the whole vaccines cause autism fabrication or misconception, really is what I should call it. In those cases, these beliefs can actually have really detrimental consequences. They can cost lives, frankly. And so I think that we need to encourage people to be skeptical, to take things they hear with a grain of salt, or maybe a dash of salt in some cases, and to look at these claims, I should say, to look for telltale signs of possible falsehood in these claims. So when I first saw this meme that my acquaintance shared on Facebook the other day, the first thing I looked for was a source. Is there a source to back this up? Is there somewhere I can go to research this issue to find out whether Black Friday is actually named after this practice that dates back to slavery days? Of course, there was no source to it. Somebody put together a graphic, found a picture, probably a stock painting of a slave auction from the antebellum South, and put a caption around it and just put it out there. Of course, lots of people lapped it up. People whose existing beliefs were confirmed by or reinforced by this meme, just completely went for it, hook, line, and sinker. So again, in a case like that, it's not that big a deal in the grand scheme of things. It's pretty harmless, but in other contexts, that bad intellectual habit can have very detrimental consequences indeed. So I remember, this is a really interesting anecdote. I want to close with this. I'll try and wrap this up now. In 2009, I remember reading a story about an Irish university student in Dublin who heard about the death of an Oscar-winning composer, Maurice Jarre, and said, you know what, let me find out just how much integrity journalists have nowadays. He made up a totally false but nonetheless plausible sounding quote about how Maurice Jarre's whole life had a soundtrack to it or something like that. And he attributed it to Maurice Jarre, inserted that quote on Maurice Jarre's Wikipedia page, his Wikipedia article about his life, and just sat back and waited to see whether he would see that claim repeated elsewhere now that the composer had just died. Before long, a whole bunch of major media outlets around the world, including The Guardian, an esteemed left-leaning publication in England, had picked it up and repeated it as if it were gospel truth. Now, the interesting thing is the folks at Wikipedia did their homework. They saw that there was no source to which that claim was attributed on the article until they took it down. But before they got a chance to do that, it had already spread. And lazy journalists the world over were repeating this claim as if it were gospel truth without bothering to do their homework. Now, if professional journalists can make a mistake like that, clearly this is indicative of the kind of mistake that all sorts of people of all backgrounds can make. So that's the message I want to send on this Black Friday. Not only should you not believe everything you hear, I don't think most people believe everything or anything that they hear. But even the things that ring true to you, you should still take with a grain of salt, because sometimes those stories and claims and rumors turn out to be false as well. Don't buy into the hype. You hear one of these claims, at least look to see what the source is. Do some digging on your own. We live in the internet age. You can Google these things. When I heard this Black Friday story, I immediately went to Snopes.com. I went to Wikipedia to see, what that article about Black Friday stated. And of course, I didn't just believe what was there either. But Wikipedia can be useful because it can lead you to sources that are credible. It's not a reliable source in and of itself, but it can lead you to sources that are credible and reliable on their own. And so it took me maybe 30 seconds of online searching to realize that this Black Friday plantation slavery story was complete bunk. If I can do that, so can you. So can anyone. So this Black Friday, spread the word. Again, Marvin Gaye sang it best. People say, believe none of what you hear and half of what you see. Don't believe everything you hear, not even if it has the ring of truth, because it tells you what you want to hear in some sense. Even then, it may still be false. This is Akil signing off. I hope I've shared some useful information with you this evening. And again, belated happy Thanksgiving to all. Later.